Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 88 of the show, and in this edition we defend our creation as we get back into the lab for Virology G-Virus. My name is Sai, and joining me on the panel this week, like the G-Virus, he's also so good that I have to stop the US government from poaching him. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Good evening, everybody.
Growing eyeballs in places that don't bear thinking about, it's Moist Owlet, aka James.
The eyes are on the inside.
And our special returning guest for this episode, this tyrant isn't programmed to seek out the G-Virus, but rather anyone who badmouths Sherry Birkin. From the Resident Evil podcast, it's Sean, aka STARS Tyrant.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
First Aid Spray is recorded in front of a live Discord server audience, so join now to hear the show early and unedited and to become part of our wonderful little community where we discuss life, the universe, and Resident Evil. You can find the server and all of our social media links at our website, faspraypod.com. That's where you can find our merchandise store and our Patreon page. First Aid Spray is nothing without our supporters. Tiers begin at $1 a month. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod to support this show. Nothing from us on the news front, so let's take it into the news from Capcom, Steve.
Boy George, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is out now on GOG, completing the original trilogy.
Hooray! I mean, I guess is the general sentiment, aside from the fact that everyone was like, well, it's coming out on September 28th, isn't it? And they dropped it on September 25th. So everyone was like, oh, come on, guys, you missed the trick there. Obviously, Stars, you've been a big proponent of, like we have, just having these games available in some form. How are you getting on with the GOG versions of Resident Evil, and have you played RE3 yet?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who sort of follows me on Twitter or has heard me on the REP is well aware, like I have a very hard approach to the remakes, but I have a lot more tolerance for remakes and things like that as long as the original versions are made available, because then I can feel like the developers can just go off and explore what avenues they want, because we as a consumer have choice. When something is taken out of an ecosystem, I feel like a remake is designed to almost replace it, and when we're talking about the classic Resident Evil trilogy, I feel that's unacceptable. So, you know, GOG or GOG, however you want to pronounce it, they do, their storefront is very good at sort of leaning toward preservation, and it's great to see these titles finally available from an actual storefront for reasonable, you know, money. I think it's like £8.99 over here. They are decent. They are decent enough to be sort of acceptable. Are they as good as they could be? No, but that goes down a grey area, which I'll keep this positive, because the reality is these games being made available, it's a start. I don't think the journey's completed until we've got them on all consoles, and I include the Switch and the Xbox in that. So I wouldn't even be fully satisfied if the PSN versions came back online of 2 and 3. I feel it needs to be, you know, it needs to be made available for everyone. But this is an amazing first step. I think, you know, Capcom have made the right choice, and it's a strong start. Resident Evil 3, unfortunately, is probably the most technically flawed of all the releases. And beyond fixes made by members of the community, I don't know how much more support certainly the RE3 version of the GOG port, if you will get in terms of, you know, fixes. So you might have to go down those, like I say, those other avenues if you want the game truly cleaned up. But for most people, they won't care.
Yeah,
and it's functional enough to be playable on most modern PCs. So that it's amazing.
Yeah, it's obviously worth mentioning that, because I think this has been the one with the more mixed response because of things like sort of polygons jittering and stuff like that. I don't know a lot about the original RE3 PC release. I've seen people saying that this was an issue with the Source Next version originally, but it is something that would have been nice that had been given some care and attention to this time, rather than literally being drag and drop and all the problems come with it kind of thing, if that's the case. Steve, any reaction to RE3 on PC?
Honestly, it's nice. Much like everyone else said, it's nice the original trilogy is available. I kind of still also echo that I wish they'd done a bit more of a bug screening. But the fact that you can just buy these and then immediately run them on not every system, but most systems considering that back in the day these would have been a bit more tedious to even set up and operate in the first place. Yeah, no, that's great. It's an excellent first step, but I hope it is not the last step. As Sean's being polite about, there's various fan mods out there that you can use to touch up these things, get them to work. Gracious to the mod creators that they have figured out ways to get them integrated with most of these versions, the GOG versions of the games. It's finding that legal ground where they can now bring that to the forefront to optimize them better. But again, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. It would be nice for the console ports. I'd like to see, not necessarily the GOG versions, but I guess more maybe the Dreamcast or GameCube versions use as a base than the PC versions. If they ever did go to console, they went down the route. Or, they might just be crazy and go, let's do a deluxe remaster. And then we all cringe because they've redubbed it, which is sacrilege. Don't do that.
Oh, God.
That would be unheard of.
It would be criminal.
Ideas.
Yeah. But generally speaking, more availability, legal availability is never a bad thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how quickly this has all come together. Well, not come together so much as the fact that they announced it and now they're all here. Quite quick rollout of all of them, to the point where my partner a couple of months ago, when I started bullying him into playing Resident Evil games, was like, okay, well, where do we start? What's available? How available are the original 3 games? So even a few months ago, I was like, basically they're not right now when it comes to modern consoles. Jump forward to now. They are at least available on PC, and fingers crossed they do come to everything. Even as someone that owns, every console of this generation right now, they need to be available everywhere, and the excitement of seeing them, coming to Game Pass or something is really appealing. Feels like it'll be a memorable moment when that does drop, because I do think that it is going to happen. It is a matter of when, as far as I'm concerned. James, any final thoughts on GOG now that we're done with this sort of rollout?
I'm really happy for people that they can play these games, because it means that I won't be whined at for liking Remake 3 anymore. Right, guys? Right?
Yeah, good luck with that.
But no, really, because that is what people wanted in the end. They wanted to be able to play the original, and now they can do that. So stop coming for me, basically. But I am happy. I will play these original games one day. Maybe when I got more time to myself, but. Yeah, I'm happy they're finally here for folks, and I think this came a little bit too, didn't came too late. I think it should have been done earlier.
Sure.
Way earlier. I mean, people have been asking for collections and stuff for years now, and with Capcom, they keep releasing games. They keep re-releasing collections for Ace Attorney, which these are all good games, and Mega Man, etc., etc. And we're seeing all these games, and then we don't see Resident Evil, and it feels a little. I get it with people. It feels like a little bit of a slight, to not see this stuff. So yeah, as everybody said, I think this is the beginning of something, and it will eventually grow into something else. And with the modding community, you give them 3 to 4 months, and everything will be fine. Just put it on the community to fix everything at the end of the day.
Pretty much.
I think a classic collection released for consoles, much in the same light as like the Fighting Collection 2 and the Marvel Arcade Classics Collection. I think it would be a perfect tonic at the minute, given the drought of sort of news we've got with regards to the future of the series, and I think it would be enough to pacify people at the minute, because there is certainly a hunger for news at the moment.
Yeah, there really is. We've gone several months where we've had basically nothing to talk about, and literally in some cases, I think the last episode there was no news at all at the time we recorded that. It's a very strange time in Resident Evil, especially following the last sort of 5 or 6 years, where it's been a pretty consistent rollout of something, game, CGI film, live action material. We've had a lot in the last few years, so maybe we are a little bit spoilt, but by comparison it feels very strange to go this long and be this quiet. And with something like you mentioned the arcade collections that Capcom have been putting out, the Marvel vs. Capcom ones and stuff like that, and the fighting collections that are rolling out, super exciting, and everyone's really jazzed about them, and those are awesome, and I'm going to pick them up because I really want to play the side-scrolling X-Men games finally. And yeah, to see the reaction to some of that stuff, which is arguably, I don't even think arguably in terms of some of those games, more obscure, and people are like, to play this, there are so many people that, like James, haven't played the original Resident Evils. It's like, we've said it for years. We'll say it until it comes. It's money left on the table if they don't do it.
At the risk of sounding like an entitled Resident Evil fan, and we know there's a lot of them around there. Like, if I see another port of Street Fighter 1 before I see a classic RE port, I am going to rip what little hair I have left out.
Fantastic. And on that note, let's head into the main subject for this podcast, which is Virology G-Virus. And now, reading the file Mail to the Chief from Resident Evil 2 1998, in character as William Birkin, Tony Cole Cocking, who you can follow on Twitter at WildTonyAppears.
To Mr. Brian Irons, Chief of the Raccoon City Police Department. We have lost the Mansion Lab facility due to the renegade operative Albert Wesker. Fortunately, his interference will have no lasting effects upon our continued virus research. Our only present concern is the presence of the remaining STARS members Redfield, Valentine, Burton, Chambers, and Vickers. If it comes to light that the STARS have any evidence as to the activities of our research, dispose of them in a way that would appear to be purely accidental. Continue to monitor their progress and make certain their knowledge does not go public. Annette will continue to be your contact throughout this affair. William Birkin. To Mr. Brian Irons, Chief of the Raccoon City Police Department. I have deposited the amount of $10,000 to the account for your services this term, as per our agreement. The development of the G-Virus scheduled to replace the T-Virus is near completion. Once completed, I am certain that I will be appointed to be a member of the executive board for Umbrella Incorporated. It is imperative that we proceed with extreme caution. Redfield and the remaining STARS members are still attempting to uncover information on the project. Continue to monitor their activities and block all attempts to investigate the underground research facilities. William Birkin. To Mr. Brian Irons, Chief of the Raccoon City Police Department. We have a problem. I have received information informing me that Umbrella HQ has sent spies to recover my research on the G-Virus. There are an unknown number of agents involved. They must not be allowed to take this project away from me, as it represents my entire life's work. Search the city thoroughly for any suspicious persons. Detain any such individuals by whatever means deemed necessary and contact me immediately through Annette. With these precautions, any possible threat should be eliminated. I will not allow anyone to steal my work on the G-Virus. Not even Umbrella. William Birkin.
So, the Virology series is back, and we do usually have a guest with the series, and we don't usually line it up in a way that we have a guest from the website that we use a lot of the information from. So I feel like I'm not meant to be sitting here, saying about the sun shining out of people's arse and stuff, but we will be using, as always, ResidentEvilPodcast.com as our source of information, as we do in all of these episodes. It's just a coincidence that Sean is also part of that unit. But yes, always the intention with Virology, of course, to give G-Virus its own episode. Several of us have a lot of strong feelings about Resident Evil 2, a lot of nostalgia and a lot of warmth for that game. So for me, the G-Virus is a big part of my love of Resident Evil, so I'm really excited to dig into it. But yes, if you would like to read more about the G-Virus and its creatures and the characters that it affects, all of that can be found on the ResidentEvilPodcast.com website on the encyclopedia section. Anything you need Resident Evil, there is a profile on it at this point, but I will be reading some segments from there in a couple of places to set us up as we talk through the G-Virus, which is, like now, as an example, the result of an experiment implanting the NEA parasite into the body of Lisa Trevor. The parasite was a prototype designed to increase control capability over Stage 3 T-Virus BOWs, like the Tyrant the Nemesis, but proved to be too volatile and would kill its host within 5 minutes of implantation. Arclay Labs researchers decided to test the NEA on Lisa Trevor because her numerous exposures to the progenitor virus over 2 decades had left her with an extraordinary vitality. Initially, the experiment seemed to work, but when the parasite entered Lisa's brain, it suddenly disappeared and subtle changes were observed in her DNA. Closer examination of her cells revealed the original form of the G virus. William Birkin immediately drew up the G virus project to headquarters and obtained approval after several years. This project became the sole focus of his work for the next decade. Before we get into, I guess, the lore parts of it, though, sort of more broadly speaking, I guess my first question is, how do we feel about this is the first sequel in the series, and they're already introducing, if you want to look at it that perspective, already, quote-unquote, introducing another viral agent. Do you think it was a good thing to sort of escalate that quickly, or was there more to be done with the T virus? Obviously, we've got 25 years of sort of retrospective, but I guess however you want to think about it at the time or now. Steve, how do you feel about Resident Evil 2 introducing another virus?
I used to ping pong around my thoughts on this, but I think generally speaking, it almost felt like a Monster of the Week kind of thing. Like in your classic Doctor Who's and your Star Trek serials, like this series, this episode, it's going to be about the T virus, and then this episode, we'll have a callback, but this time it's the G virus. I'm okay with it because in this case, the idea that Umbrella being a bioweapons manufacturer and the idea that they would be making monsters and using them to profit and whatnot. At the time, I know the law is a lot more complex now, but the idea that they just basically, we have a new product, a new weapons program. I'm totally on board with it. There is a point where it gets ridiculous further on the series, but I think first foot forward in the first sequel, it's fine.
Yeah, totally. James, how do you feel about the inclusion of the G virus in the series at this point?
I'm going to come right out the gate and mention an Aliens reference.
Of course. Here we go. Get it in early.
Straight at the beginning. It's normally at the end. But so the thing with Aliens is when Jim Cameron did that movie, he wanted to change, but keeping like the base of the original, but he also wanted to create his own thing and expand on the universe. And I feel like Resident Evil 2 is very much like that. Like they wanted to keep kind of the basic needs you have of Resident Evil, but yeah, they want to be bold and create something new, reinvent, evolve. I think that's a word that's been used a lot at the moment. The franchise with this, it leads like to new experiences for the player. In a movie sense, to the viewer, it heightens that horror because it's something you don't expect as well. And like especially with what like players dealt with before in Resi 1, like there was a relative slow burn. Again, just like Aliens, like in the first hour, nothing really happens, right? And you get this slow burn in RE2 of G slowly coming out. Actually, it's not. It's a slow burn of your realization of what it is.
Yes,
agreed. Which is really cool, and that's different. And it's fantastic, like from a writer's point of view, and it's one of my favorite things about the story of this game. Like, is that slow burn? But I have bias. Obviously, I just mentioned it. But I really like it from a writer's point of view. I think it's cool to invent, reinvent, evolve. But I think they did well in just keeping to the foundations of Resident Evil. They didn't go too far, because you can go too far with stuff if you try and go a step beyond. But they didn't with this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, in a series that is now coming up to 30 years, everyone's got this is the jump the shark moment, I think. And that where that is obviously varies from person to person. Because, Resident Evil's done a lot, as you both said, about reinvention and Monster of the Week, almost kind of situations. And James, you sort of landed on something that I have in my notes here, is that I really liked and still like that the main monster of Resident Evil 2 is not just a bigger version of the Tyrant. Yeah, we have Mr. X, and perhaps that's the most iconic enemy in the game. I think that's certainly the case now, maybe not pre-remake. It always felt like G was the kind of starring monster of Resident Evil 2, because, it's the final boss, for goodness sake. So having, as you said, something that really subverts your expectation, something that you don't know or don't understand that you have to unravel that mystery of as you go and find out who it is. And especially in G's case, where you fight him in sort of a different order, the mutations than actually take place with the A and B playthroughs, and then we throw back a classic nostalgia monster sort of thing with the Tyrant in the B playthrough. But having G front and center really helped separate Resident Evil 2 from 1, instead of just being like, it's Resident Evil 1, but now it's in a police station and the Tyrant is bigger, or, you know, there's multiple or whatever. Sean, what's your feelings on introducing a new viral agent in the first sequel?
Yeah, I mean, echoing a lot of what James just said, I was actually going to use, you know, the sort of typical sequels of the 80s and 90s, like Alien and Aliens and things like that. To me, that's what Resident Evil 2 felt like. It felt like kind of what you had before, but expanded and a bit bigger. And look, there's a new virus to get excited about. And I really enjoyed it. I felt it was the first game. When you played it back in the day, you didn't really have any sense of idea where a sequel would go, and obviously there was the 1.5 stuff in the news, but even then it was so vague, and you didn't really get a lot of it. And then when the final Resident Evil 2 came out, it was very different from a lot of what we were seeing, and I just felt it was the perfect way to expand the series. It possibly set up a bit too much expectation for future sequels. Were we going to get a new type virus each game? You know,
right.
And obviously we didn't, because Resident Evil 3 essentially throws back a lot more to the first game in terms of like setting and characters, and there just being, I know there's the Nemesis and things like that in Resident Evil 3, but in terms of like expanding the universe, I feel Resident Evil 2 was just what, after I said before, I think the game is breathtaking. I love it so much, and a lot of that is down to how it took that singular idea of being lost in a mansion and just expanded it in a way that still felt respectful and sensible. It didn't feel like we were going absolutely crazy straight away, like some sequels can get really out of hand. I still felt it was grounded enough to be, you know, a very respectful sequel to the first title. Yeah, loved it.
I remember as well, it's worth sort of putting this in here, that around the time of the release of the game, there was a lot of confusion that I found amongst fans that everything was the result of the G virus. I don't know if you guys who grew up with the series remember this. And I think that this was, if I had to guess, maybe, well, a combination of things. I think there's a line in Claire B that implies that the Tyrant is the result of the G virus, which is a bit of a mistranslation. I think Irons says that you know, that monster running around out there, something like that. But also, I think more than that as well, magazines would just, at the time, video game magazines would print stuff and people would just kind of go, okay, yeah, we don't have any reason to doubt this, but there were magazines that would be like, oh, it's got a new virus, and here's all the monsters in the game. And whether people misinterpreted that or if the magazine misinterpreted it, but I definitely remember there being spreads of like, these are zombies and these zombie dogs are all from the G virus, and it's like, no, actually Resident Evil 2 has both viruses. They're very separate things, which obviously you understand as you play the game. But yeah, I remember that being a point of confusion, certainly in the sort of pre-internet when magazines ruled the video game world.
Oh, that's a core memory you've just scraped out. I remember an old strategy guide, like an old magazine strategy guide, I want to say like Official PlayStation or something, and it's giving a rundown on all the monsters, and it literally segments T virus and G virus.
Oh, okay.
And G, it's just got Birkin's like base form, the one that, you know, and then G adult and the liquor. So the liquor was being lumped in with them, despite the fact that we know obviously now it's not. It's a variation of the V-Act process. And then you've got zombies and zombie dog and tyrant. But I believe the tyrant's in the middle because they're not sure. But core memory, the liquor gets mischaracterized as a G, despite the fact all the G things have giant eyes, and that's the one without them. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to what you just said there, Si, there was a lot of problems with some of the language and terminology used in the game. So, for example, a really early one is between if you play Claire. No, I think it's actually used in both. When they're speaking to Annette, the character comes to the conclusion, whoever you're playing, whether you're Ada or Claire, comes to the conclusion that the rats were the spreaders of the virus.
Right.
But because like the G virus has been like the point of topic in that conversation, it's very easy to misinterpret what is actually being implied there. And I think that's where a lot of that confusion initially came from. Absolutely.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Yeah, it came from a lot of places. The magazine one, I think I might have mentioned this on the pod at one point. We've been going a long time, so it's entirely possible. But I just remember vividly many years ago going through a stack of old Games Master magazines, and there was it was when Resident Evil 2 was on the N64, and it might not have been Games Master, it might have been official Nintendo magazine, but either way, they had like a big spread on it, and there was a bunch of screenshots that referred to Irons as the mayor, who was also Sherry's dad. And I was like, you have somehow got all the ends of the stick wrong here. Like, I don't know how you managed to confuse. This game's been out like 2 years. How did you get this confused? But it happens. And then, yeah, people who don't know the games, or whatever, casual fans, if you like, and not meant as a dig, will just run with that. But I think everything's pretty clear in this day and age. Speaking of clear, let's do a big lore dump now before we really start breaking down, our thoughts on the G virus itself. The fundamental difference between the G virus and the T virus is that G infection creates an evolutionary process in its host that would eventually lead to an entirely new life form. In other words, the G cells brought about by the virus fundamentally changed its host organism's body structure. Through this method, infected individuals repeated unpredictable change and became an entirely new species with the ability to propagate. G breeding was performed by implanting G breeding was performed by implanting embryos by G breeding was performed by implanting embryos proliferated in its body into other creatures. In this case, G tended to be instinctively searching for hereditary close relatives, as a normal G was more likely to be born when the genetics of the host were close to the target creature. In addition, the G virus was even said to bring the dead back to life. Whilst the T virus just induced random mutations, the purpose of the G virus was to induce mutations that could evolve the subject into a new breed or separate stable species. Therefore, the ultimate goal for William Birkin was to create and breed G humans by using the virus to create an evolved race of metahumans. This was the reason the G virus was sometimes referred to as the God virus, and as a result, Birkin changed his focus and tried to use the G virus to create a new race and not just biological weapons. Other speculations about the G are that it actually stands for Golgotha, which is the site where Jesus Christ was crucified and would later be reborn as a god, which is obviously a pretty symbolic thing. And I think that word might appear in concept sketches, but I don't think it's actually... Sean, you might know, but I don't think it's ever actually mentioned in a file or in any of the lore. But it's definitely a term that gets kicked around still to this day. But I think, strictly speaking, G-Virus doesn't stand for anything. That's my understanding.
Yeah, it's very much open to interpretation. The Golgotha or Golgotha, I actually don't know how to say it. Is it Golgotha?
Sure. I have no idea.
Yeah, that was featured from what I understand to be like early concepts and possibly even used in 1.5, but has never been featured anything official, if you will. But humorously, when Dead by Daylight came out, someone who worked on that game for the Resident Evil pack literally copied and pasted the Wikipedia pages, the RE Wiki,
Dear.
and they use Golgotha or Golgotha on those pages. And so you could argue that it did actually have its first semi-canonical reference in Dead by Daylight.
That's incredible. Oh dear. Okay. Well, yes. So, as mentioned in that lore there, I think it's important to get into the intentions of the G virus from the point of view of Birkin and how that relates to Umbrella and so on and so forth. What do we think of that? Because obviously there's a lot of things going on with Umbrella at this point. We know that Spencer's crew sort of search for immortality and stuff like that is the real sort of beating heart of everything. But then we've got layers beyond that with them, creating biological weapons, but also disguising themselves as a pharmaceutical company. So it's quite a layered thing. How do we feel about Birkin and his pursuit of the G virus? Stars, let's start with you.
And I think what was always quite frustrating back in the day was that the actual game itself, Resident Evil 2, just breaking down that initially, doesn't actually feature a lot of this backstory that you've just read out to us.
No, absolutely.
The game actually leads very vague in terms of what, William's obsession is as such. And you don't really get any concrete answers in the game itself. You could argue, I can't really speak for the Japanese sources and things like that. That would be more Batman's area of expertise. But certainly from like a Western material point of view, I don't really think we got the G virus expanded until we got the West Coast Report 2 things. So for years there was this this kind of grey area on exactly what the ultimate goal of the G virus was, because certainly the way it's depicted in the game is exceedingly powerful in terms of like how it revitalizes William, but also quite tragic because in many ways the further you go from a step toward like immortality, the use of the G virus is a step away from humanity, because you become this, the price of this is this huge gelatinous blob. And so it does lead to this question that a lot of people have in the Resident Evil fandom, is like, what is the end goal if you have become one of these creatures? Like, obviously, you evolve. Birkin evolves through the course of the game because he gets repeatedly defeated by Leon and Claire, and it's those defeats that lead to the very violent mutations. So one assumes that had he not been involved in combat, he would have probably stayed around like the G1 level of mutation, where he retains a lot of sense of self. So in that, he probably would have just pursued a rather twisted drive of just infecting compatible hosts and things like that, and then we would have had an entire city full of
blob
monstrous I suppose a really accurate game interpretation of that is the sewers in the remake. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting virus. At the time, going back to the original question, at the time it was hard to really interpret exactly what that end goal was.
Because of that, I think Birkin's quite an interesting case study, because the easy point of view of him is, I always read him as kind of being more obsessed with just the work itself, not necessarily the result, because we don't get told what the actual, as you said, the end game is. And I don't see him on the same level of Wesker and Spencer and their desire for the result as such as his pursuit of the journey of it, the joy, the thrill of what he does. All the notes that we get on Birkin and who he is and his work are very much just about the work, and his paranoia, of course. But we haven't actually heard lots about him as a person and sort of what his sort of ultimate goals and desires were. I do think that it speaks to Spencer's sort of indoctrination, as it were. We know that quite literally with Wesker, but you have to wonder everyone within his inner circle, and Birkin being such a high-up researcher implies that he was probably part of that. He was probably also sold on the sort of, eugenics that Spencer was into as well. But I just don't think it was quite the same as someone like a Wesker, who obviously had that like mentally programmed into him from a young age. But it at least offers him something differently, and this is why we get something like, I think, Scholarly Will is such an apt name, because it's just his sort of thirst for knowledge, perhaps more than his desire to be immortal. But again, it might come down to translation and the fact that a lot of the actual backstory of G-Virus did come later, as you said. Steve, how do you feel about the intentions of G-Virus from the point of view of Birkin and Umbrella?
I always had kind of a bit of an umbrage with Wesker's report too, because it always seemed to go against the current of every other bit about the creation of the G-Virus. Like, every bit inside the games, generally speaking, it's about the work, the science, William's not so much as concerned about the end result as such he is perfecting his life's work. But we never have a single document in-game or a cutscene that outlines exactly what his life's work is, except to perfect the G-Virus. It's not until Wesker's report where it implies that he wants to make his own superior version of like G-humans and things. I imagine, really, that it's hard to put this into words, so give me a second. But I think that if he was cognizant enough to know the end result of what happens to late-stage G-Virus infection, that he would never have injected himself with it. Or if he knew that it would lead to him basically interacting with his own daughter. I know he's a monstrous man. Like, I know he's an evil man who works for Umbrella, but his only speaking lines prior to infection are, "This is my life's work," or, "It's sheer perfection, my precious G-Virus." Excluding those lines with, Resident Evil 0, where I will take over your research. Ha 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 ha. It doesn't really jump up to I'm going to create my own god beings. That seems more like Spencer would push him to do that if Spencer knew about G's capabilities. This is more. I always saw him more as a tinkerer,
Yeah.
But then he gets shot in the arm. He injects himself, and it all goes a bit Pete Tong. The giant underbelly, the lab underneath, the disposal side of the lab underneath, above the lab in Resident Evil 2 remake. I always that's the bit that scares me the most about the G virus. Like Sean touched upon it. Like if they were allowed to basically intermingle and copulate long enough, I feel like it could be. That's the kind of end game level event with this stuff. I don't see Birkin unleashing it. That's the puzzling thing. Obviously, he did, but yeah, all the things I see, excluding Wesker's report, don't really gel with that idea.
It's an interesting point, and obviously, there's something to be said now or later about the fact that the G virus wasn't necessarily finished, even though Birkin seemed to believe so. But yeah, how much did he actually know about his own creation, considering, as you've said there, it puts his family at risk if he injects himself. So it's an interesting choice to do that, I suppose. James, how do you feel about the G virus and the intentions of this viral agent?
So with Birkin, I think it was like the old adage of pride with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he
absolutely.
Like I think I'm getting deja vu. I think I spoke about this on the previous virology episode, but like there's so much infighting within Umbrella.
Yeah.
Like that. Like it's one of its founding principles, basically. Like an unheard thing. You know, it's like everybody fights each other. You try and scrape your way to the top. Like so to discover something new, and with the pride he has in his work. And with the capabilities it had, which, I agree. I don't think he fully understood what he was creating, which don't come for me, Birkin, okay? I'm just the messenger. But yeah, it would have been as I say, it would have been a great way for him to climb the ladder and get to the top, which is what I got from him. Like with all the kind of post RE2 cutscenes and stuff.
Yeah,
like,
especially the thing Steve said about Zero, and I will take over your research, haha. Even though it doesn't technically make sense, it seems very businessy, backstabby, doesn't it?
Yeah, like in my opinion, I don't think it's much bigger than that. Like,
sure.
Like it drove him to try and create, because every villain like has this. They try and create their magnum opus. Like in this series, they always try and create their perfect thing, whatever it is. No matter the cost. I think his story came around, him sacrificing himself, dying on his own sword, essentially was perfect. It was a perfect kind of circle for him in terms of writing. In terms of like Umbrella and Friends, which you're going to hear a couple of times through this, it must have been really inviting to see a virus that propagated with like a minimal chance of infection. At first,
right?
It could be controlled, manipulated quite easy, like in comparison to like T virus, which wasn't. So that's kind of that they must have looked at it and gone, oh, this is just a better version. This is 2.0. And we, the results, however, like they might not have been very inviting for the boardroom. Once you would have seen Birkin and like G3, etc. Or it might have been really exciting because it's like, it's like, oh wow, we could have like a bunch of these on the battlefield fighting our wars. That would be sick. But they wouldn't say that in the boardroom, but
they might do. You don't know.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, it was really restrictive of how it spread. Like needing the blood of a close relative.
Well, not needing that. That's just the ideal. They'll go for whatever's in range.
Right, but they will sniff out, like, if they can sniff the blood, or if they can sniff, like, the DNA or the blood of someone, it will go for it, which is why Birkin was always searching for Sherry, right? He was always looking for that. But yeah, like, needing that, it gave, like, I think it might have given the corporations, like, a pretty big ask to be like, oh yeah, by the way, you're gonna have to sacrifice your uncle, or your cousin, not to go too creepy with it, because I think that story is a bit creepy. But
sure.
yeah, but like in terms of like a monetary expenditure sense, like it just would have made sense to them, like at first, without seeing the results. But I mean, we'll talk about it later on, but we saw results, and they keep propagating it and wanted to keep using it as a base for other stuff as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, actually, because I think, we talked a little bit about how the G virus was the end goal. Seems kind of imperfect, because it technically was when we saw it in Resident Evil 2. I did kind of begin to wonder, why are Umbrella so keen on kind of almost swiping this out from Birkin, or at least that's what he believes, other than the fact that the US government were also potentially going to get involved and swipe Birkin out from under them. But yeah, you're right, like the fact that they don't spread quite like wildfire when it comes to the G virus, when it's not bites and scratches, it's a more deliberate thing. Is there something they can do to potentially control that or whatever? But it's a very good point about the controlled infection rate, and that's a very sellable aspect. If they could cut that out and put it on something else, maybe that's a really interesting thing.
I just want to say prior, I'm going to sound like an absolute mad scientist throughout the entire podcast.
It's virology. We welcome it.
It's going to get to a point where I'm actually going to start questioning about, wait a second, is James actually Birkin? Birkin 2.0? Maybe.
It's a twisted thing. Like, not to just go a bit off.
No,
I know,
go ahead, Steve.
talking about the grimness of it, how you would weaponize this in any kind of shape or form. Like, you don't even need to infect a parent, do you? You could go the other way around, and it still probably would be compatible.
Totally.
That's horrifying to me. The whole thing evokes face huggers and that kind of concept, biological detail. I hate to be reminded of the film Resident Evil. Well, yeah, okay, but the AVP film with the Pred alien,
Requiem.
Yeah, like that, that and Modern G, like easily the most uncomfortable thing. Just thinking about, and then you have no real control over it, other than you become either a parent to a monster or you become a monster yourself. It's much more cruel and malicious to use this as a weapon than I'd say than just deploying T. This is almost spiteful. Sorry.
Feels way more. It could be used for deliberate. Something more deliberate than T-virus, which is such a blanket, like drop it here and this city is ruined kind of thing.
If you want to kill a population and quote unquote humanely in the Resident Evil universe, it's T. Inhumanely and cruel beyond all imagination, something you might not be able to put down after, it's G.
Interesting point. So I did the backstory there about the G virus's origins, the NEA parasite, and Lisa Trevor, which I think we've spoken about in a previous episode, obviously. But how do we feel about how it pertains to the origins of the G virus? Obviously, this is, again, stuff that came later, between sort of 98 and, I guess, 2002. I'm not actually quite sure when the actual first mention of, this is where the G virus came from, was. But we had a few years and we didn't know where the G virus originally was sort of cut from. But how do we feel about this being weaved in with Lisa Trevor and stuff like that? James?
It's like I feel like the connection between these two is really complex, and I think it's meant to be that way because it's meant to make you think, oh, this is far beyond my understanding, and the pseudoscience part of it, and like there's the unintended consequences of Umbrella's bioresearch as well. Like you're like, oh, how deep does it go? I love the origins connected to Lisa. I always will. Like that connection to the progenitor is something I really love, and I really want it to be spoken about more and put into more future entries in the beginning because, it's a bit muddled right now. It's a bit messy. Like there is a lot of stuff that does have full stops at the end, but like the age of mystery of these viruses is. That is of great interest to me, and we of recent years we've kind of got a little bit about that, which I've really enjoyed. I think we've spoken enough, in my opinion, about kind of what happened in the 50s and the 80s, and
Sure.
we've spoken about all that way too much, and we're getting like kind of repeats. So seeing the origins, where it comes from, I want more of that. I want elaborations on that. I want a final confirmation that Lisa Trevor is still alive in that forest.
Of course. Generally speaking, I think that this is like a great example of the kind of links that I really like in this series. All these things are umbrella stuff, so to tie them all together is a great thing. It is kind of funny because we got an answer to where the G virus came from. It came from putting the NEA on Lisa Trevor. Okay, sure. What's the NEA parasite?
Yeah.
What's the origin of that? So it's still kind of unknown. I mean, I know there's now implications that it might be something to do with the Plagas, but that's obviously up for debate depending on your interpretation of events and remakes. And it's been 20 years. For a long time, it was just like, it's a parasite. Okay, sure, whatever. But in terms of a connection, I think it's great for a couple of reasons. One of which being that it's like a non-repeatable instance in time. Lisa Trevor's body was such a unique thing in the series as this hotbed of viruses that they just plunged her full of stuff that you would be hard-pressed to replicate getting something like the G virus in the series outside of somebody still has a sample from the stealings of 1998, which makes the G virus feel really special and like a rare moment in time. And also, I just like the connection in general because I didn't know this for a very, very, very long time. But painting Resident Evil the board game, having the Lisa Trevor model out in front of me, I was like, oh, there's an eyeball on her back, and I didn't even notice. I don't know how visible that is in game. Maybe I'm just too terrified all the time running away from the damn thing. But yeah, while painting the model, I was like, oh, she has a giant eyeball on her back. That's interesting. Did that come before or after? Who knows? That's up for you to speculate. But obviously, that ties her to the G virus, which is pretty cool. Sean, how do you feel about the origins of G as it stands?
When we were in the run up, the promo for the remake, and they were releasing the 5 chapters of Wesker's Report 2 weekly, it was very exciting to finally get to the because we didn't know this was going to happen, that we were going to get the origins of the G virus. We just thought this was a very cool, like almost Wesker's diary of events that lead up to, the Fateful Mansion incident. So we didn't know at the time that we were going to be getting this grand sweeping history of like Birkin and their time
Progenitor
together.
For me, I remember that being okay.
Yeah.
It's some real interest on what's going on with the Progenitor. And
so when you get to the G virus chapter, it was like, it feels kind of forced, but it's the best thing ever. It makes total sense, and it helps sort of weave the narrative together very well. And I just remember just thinking it was just absolutely genius. And then I just remember being so crushingly disappointed in the remake because it took this approach of being so self-contained, Remake 2, because it was being seen as like an introductionary point for a lot of new fans, that we didn't get any of this weaved into the backstory of the G virus in the remake, because it would have made total sense to have like files that elaborate and lift pieces from Wesker's Report 2. But so that that aside, I thought it was exceptionally clever how they did it. It, in some ways, I suppose the argument is it can make your universe feel very small when all these things are interweaved and connected, but I don't mind that so much because we do know that like Birkin, was working with Wesker throughout those decades, so it made perfect sense that the origins of this virus would begin, with this tragic little girl. Unfortunately, you can see the eye on the back in game as well.
Yeah, I imagine you can.
Yeah. Very satisfied with it. I thought it was genius.
Yeah, for sure. Steve, how do you feel about the origins of G?
Same as everybody else. It's like a best of album of all the things in Resident Evil to that point. Confluence in this one unfortunate victim, and you can even get Nemesis' tentacles sprouting out of her. Sort of.
Absolutely.
If you argue the adjustments, I'm using the word adjustments with air quotes and to be diplomatic, to the any alpha parasite lore, that makes it even more of a confluence of events, really, because then you've got a fake plaga that becomes a merger with progenitor and T to make G, which basically draws all 4 of the original entries together to buff up the second entry. I'm fine with it being the Infinity Stone gauntlet of bioweapons, mainly because it's probably the biggest endgame one of the lot. But also, my God, is it convoluted and whatnot, if you really, really think about it. Yeah. But, I mean, it also gives us a nice little out as to why there is a separate, malicious, violent intelligence that subverts most of the people we have seen infected with G, that it literally could just be the parasite wresting control from host and taking control. With the exception, hopefully, of Lisa. Lisa seems a little bit more cogitant than the her successors of various G virus-related things. Hopefully, her attachment to her parents is not G-dictated, because otherwise that makes it even more grim. Generally speaking, I love it. That it's twisted and it's messed up, but also it is very, 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 very convenient.
I do think it's obviously worth mentioning as well that thematically it is kind of fitting that one of the most tragic stories in Resident Evil, being Lisa Trevor, kind of is the reason we have one of the most tragic stories in Resident Evil being the Birkin family and what happened to them. It's so funny those things are connected because of stuff like this, so it does work that way. And to your point, like when you think about the effects of G, hadn't even considered that. Like the fact that the parasite, like the NEA, sort of takes control of the host, as we know from Nemesis over time, or can do. Similar thing with the G virus. Eventually, through more mutations, you kind of seemingly lose your humanity. We see it more clearly than anything in Remake 2, where Birkin is actually yelling Sherry in G1, and then it's all gone, obviously, and all that remains is kind of that twisted face somewhere in the body every time. Hadn't even really considered that sort of aspect of it is potentially connected to the parasites. A very good point. We'll get onto effects in a moment. Just a bit more set up. The last little bit of reading here is that, as I said before, it should obviously be stated that the G virus wasn't necessarily finished, as obviously what Birkin becomes when he injects himself isn't some perfect organism, at least not by conventional description, since he completely loses himself to the virus and its instinct, as we just said. So G is never outright finished or perfected. Umbrella sent agents in to retrieve G out of Birkin's hands before the destruction of Raccoon, and as a result, they had an imperfect product and a dead lead researcher. We'll get more into what that leads to for the canon, I guess. But let's, talk more about effects. We have kind of touched on it as we've gone. How do we feel about G-Virus? Do we feel that it's grounded enough amongst the rest of the series? As I said, there's a lot of jumping off points for folks at different points throughout the franchise to be like, this is too wild for me. But Sean, you said before that Resident Evil 2 is very good at not completely going off the deep end. And felt like an adequate sort of leveling up of things. How do you feel about the G virus in terms of its grounding in the series and how it fits with everything that pre-existed?
I think it ties in very well. I think it manages to be something completely separate to the T virus in terms of like what it does to a host, but it does so without them being, large dinosaurs that can mutate back to a human being almost at will and things like that. The price on Birkin is, as I mentioned earlier, the more damage he takes, the more the virus works to keep him alive, but it's at the expense of these horrific mutations and tumours and things like that. And there is something, I still think one of the greatest pieces of body horror in the entire series is watching this human face just gradually melt and slide down into the mass. I think it's one of the most sort of nightmarish things in the series. I mean, the remake 2 pushes it a little bit further because he does start to gain, somewhat impressive sizes in that. Like the G3 fight in the remake, he is, he's probably about as tall as a house at that point. Whereas in the original game, he's barely taller than he's probably about 8 foot when you fight him on the train platform. But he very much is just a slightly more sort of expanded tyrant. He's just a large humanoid creature with a very, very big claws. And then when he becomes the large, I mean, he becomes like the G4 dog beast, whatever you want to call it first. But even that didn't feel like it was outlandish. So I think in terms of like power levels, if you want to call it like that, it feels very much, grounded and in keeping, which I then feel was like naturally progressed with the Nemesis. It's only really when you get to the accursed RE4 do you start getting crazy mutations and, room-sized bosses and things. I think certainly if you're just keeping it within the grounds of the Resident Evil trilogy, I think they're very neat, self-contained, very sensibly in terms of science fiction, if you will. It's when you get to later entries, it starts leaning more into fantasy. But I think the G virus is a scare, almost scary. In terms of like the body horror approach, is rarely been bettered, I think.
Agreed. You've absolutely sort of queued up both my sort of points here that I wanted to make, was that the sci-fi element of this rather than the fantasy element of this, the idea of a virus that needs similar tissue in order to spread, just like that seems so realistic and like it could genuinely happen. The idea that if it gets in the wrong DNA, then it just sort of freaks out and sort of rejects itself, which we'll obviously get to a little bit on from here. But yeah, the idea that the transformative DNA without a base organism that suits it just kind of leaves this blob, even though it's fantastical sci-fi, it still does make sense. It's like excess mass that just has to go somewhere. And in terms of grounding as well, from a story perspective, yes, this is a deeply upsetting virus because the T virus is sad and scary because it can infect anyone that you love. That's what makes it sad, and we see that story again throughout the series in various forms. But the G virus, as we've said before, specifically seeks out your family, and that is quite horrifying. Steve, how do we feel about the grounding of the G virus?
I mean, it definitely helps that we see it progress in stages, doesn't it? Like, seeing not just one horrific transformation, but you get the whole like path. And the credit to 1998 Capcom, because the animations still make my eyes pop every time. Like, you can see the progression of stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4 to stage 5. Maybe 4 and 5 are a bit grey, depending on where you sit on, quadrupedal, septipedal dog thing to giant blob death machine. But, I think we've earned it at that point. It reminds me of the film The Fly. In that,
sure.
the remake of the film The Fly, because you basically you see the progression of the disease and how Seth Brundle devolves or evolves, depending on how you look at it, in that as well. Generally speaking, horrifying to behold it, and I always love the implications of losing to oneself and the idea of a other repurposing his form against his will, and he's just hanging on and he's losing the battle. Especially, this is evoked a lot more in 1.5's speech, I say, and obviously Remake 2's first round with G, and I suppose when he takes out Tyrant on Claire's route, losing the battle with himself to then be completely subservient to the will of the monster, and then the monster keeps getting bigger and scarier, and there's less and less of him each time. Compared to the likes of, say, Excella in RE5, where she basically sprouts tentacles, eats about 5 corpses, and then is also the size of a skyscraper in under 30 seconds. Yeah, and I'll take this. Something that occurs over the, 22nd through to the 28th. 6 days. 6 days of fun for William Birkin, and most of that occurs on one night. I'll take it. It's. I mean, I'm still wondering how much of it is trauma-based, because the G1 Birkin that we see arguably looks... I mean, we don't truly know what happened. We only get Annette's recollection. But the version of G1 Birkin we see there, and then the version of G1 Birkin we see elsewhere, they're kind of almost incongruous. Like, hasn't changed much. So how much of that is just pure trauma-based response?
The only inconsistency I see there, which I wanted to raise, was the FMV version of Birkin that you see, and also the Birkin that is featured in the intro to Outbreak, is a much further gone version than when we see him as G1 on the events of September 29th. And I headcanon that as the virus going into overdrive to revive him. If you like, it's having to do all that healing. So I think it like almost creates this massive inflammation in his arm that then eventually does settle and go down. And that's how we see him in the state he is in the 29th. But certainly there is a bit of a slight inconsistency with how enormous he certainly is in the Outbreak footage.
See, I always had headcanon that Annette attempted devil on him in some form.
Okay.
To try and suppress it, and it just, we're too far gone.
You've ruined it now, Steve. That entire period is just going to be William Birkin's 6 Days of Fun now. That's what it's coolled. So thank you for that. James, how do you feel about the G virus in terms of the realism of it?
Folks said what I was gonna, but it's one of the pinnacle viruses in the series. It's like everyone remembers that eyeball, the chest tearing, the life cycle of it. It's so iconic, it belongs in the series. Easily from. I don't know, what was it like. Like, what was the reception for this like?
Generally pretty positive, I remember, because it was such a far cry from like Resident Evil 1's monsters are obviously, a lot of them are bigger, meaner, sort of flesh hanging off versions of identifiable creatures. We did have a few weird ones, obviously, with something like the Chimera perhaps being the most striking, and obviously the Tyrant as well. But even the Hunter is, scary reptile monster, but it's somewhat discernible. But as has been mentioned, the sort of body horror aspect of G sort of transforming again and again into wilder creatures, it was like a big step away from what we'd had in '96. Certainly, it was like a next level thing.
I mean, people still talk as James, Steve just did then. The morphing effects on the PlayStation 1 are still celebrated today for just like how astonishingly good they are. Like the metamorphosis between the G phases, it just like they're breathtaking to think that they were realized on 1998 hardware. In fact, you could even argue the mutations in the remake are nowhere near as good because they tend to happen off screen.
Yeah, that's true.
Or Brian Irons.
Yeah. The vivid sort of, you just picture it in your head and also hear it, like the sound effects of the changes, especially sort of on the train platform, the G3 fight, definitely vivid in my mind. And now, reading the file Report About G from Resident Evil 2 2019, InB, who you can follow on Twitter @ArtistDuality.
The G-Virus clinical trial will be entering its final phase very soon. Before G, the new creature that will surpass humanity, is born, allow me to predict a few things about its biology and its biological functions. Intelligence. The subject's intelligence will begin to drop immediately, with their linguistic abilities disappearing within a matter of days. Finally, they will lose their capacity to reason and their humanity. G will be a creature of pure instinct, driven only by a need to survive and reproduce. Physical abilities. Due to its unusually accelerated cell division, evolution, it will be highly adaptable to any environment. Furthermore, with its amazing ability to repair itself through regeneration, it will be extremely difficult to completely kill it with any conventional small firepower. Reproductive behavior. G's most remarkable feature will be its intense desire to reproduce. It will instinctively search out humans with DNA that closest matches its own and implant an embryo in them. But the chances of success are very low, and if the DNA is not a close enough of a match, an underdeveloped G creature will be produced instead.
I suppose the only ones who might be a close enough of a match would be any biological children of the subjects. Though...
But let's talk about the mutations. You've teed me up nicely for the next one. Then just sort of cap off the 1998 G virus incident. Talk about William Birkin first, and then we'll talk about the G adults or the G mutants, however you want to refer to them. But does everyone have like any particular favourite William Birkin mutations and that kind of thing? Steve?
Oh God, right. To behold the actual transformation itself of going from 1 to 2, but the actual silhouette of 3, I think I'm a fussy person. Like, I prefer this whole shape, but I prefer this transformation. That's generally where I sit. Anything after that, it's a bit ridiculous. I like there's a little interval stage at least in RE2 Classic, for stage 3, even though it's very subtle. Like, you damage G2 Birkin enough, he pops a squat, and then all of a sudden he's trying to sprout extra arms out, but he hasn't quite got it yet, and then you just knock him down and he returns later on. I appreciate that there's even mid-fight transformations. Obviously, the big one in that is going from 4 to 5. No, sorry, 3 to 4. I'm getting my G forms. Hashtag fake Resident Evil fan. G forms are completely mixed up.
Not true fan.
Yeah, no, not a true fan. But generally speaking, the transformation from 2 to 3. 1 to 2, and then 3, the silhouetted 4-armed beast.
Mm. I think the G2 in terms of the silhouette is quite memorable for me, and I might have mentioned this before. G2 is one of the most iconic Resident Evil designs in my brain, but that might be because I owned the figurine from it from way back in the day. I just seem to remember there being a selection of choices in front of me in some comic book store or whatever when I wasn't expecting to find Resident Evil stuff in the wild. And I picked G2 with little Sherry Birkin. And that might still be floating around at my parents' house, I don't know. But so I've always sort of had a soft spot for G2, even though it seems to be that a lot of people kind of memorably remember G3, which I think probably quite fairly, because it's a strong boss fight, a very memorable boss fight in the game. But G2 for me is a very captivating design. It's when the big eyeball really becomes a prominent feature as well, which is obviously, it's kind of if you were to take a single piece of iconography from Resident Evil 2, I know eyeballs throughout the series, but Resident Evil 2 has a very strong eyeball logo because it's that big yellow goopy, one, which is so maybe that's a part of it as well. James, any particular favourites? G mutations from 1998?
It's tough because like they've all, second reference. It's like asking me which alien is my favorite. No, like I feel like the most iconic is G2, but my favorite is G3.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was doing research for this, I saw that, and also it was on the Resident Evil podcast site, I think as well. They mentioned it, but the first form, I saw that like the form when he spawned and mutated out of his right side, because he got shot there.
Oh, interesting.
And he took moments before like he injected the virus into him. Like when that happened, like it's a really cool detail that here's the mind scientist part. It really got me thinking because I was like, what would happen if Birkin wasn't shot? Like the virus
he
itself
decided to inject himself for the sake of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, what would have happened? Would he have turned into the actual superhuman thing he expected? Like
interesting.
Like the more serious an injury. The other thing with G is like the more serious an injury you have, the faster it works because
it's a bit of a quiet Thursday.
But yeah, without sounding like a mad scientist, like I also wonder what would have happened to Sherry if she didn't get the devil neutralizer. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
like injected into her, like. Though, or did we get to see what would have happened? That was the plan, maybe with what we got with Sherry. But I'll go more into that later on with the Sherry. Yeah. But yeah, like steadily you see this decline, or what I think Birkin might call ascension. Like
who knows?
Maybe if he had his right right mind, and he did. Maybe if he didn't get
Maybe
shot,
he had his right side.
yeah. Maybe if he got shot in the foot,
Papercut, better take the G virus.
But it's so iconic. Like, his creature has its own identity. It's so different from the Tyrant, which we see far too often as well. And we're kind of lucky that we got G before the saturation of Tyrants. Like, throughout all, because that was one thing I was going to mention in the previous. But yeah, it's kind of lucky that we got all of those, like, throughout. Before we got all the Tyrants in every other piece of media that we keep getting. Not, I like Tyrants.
We don't now, but yeah, we definitely went through a period.
Yeah, and I'm surprised we haven't revisited it much in other games as well, because like it's used as a base or in conjunction with like a lot of other viruses. Like it's used a lot. And like my fave form is G3. It's a unique design. It looks perfected, but in a gross way.
Yeah,
it looks like that is what was supposed to be achievable, and that could be what Birkin might have been wanting to get to, and it might have been what he imagined, like, as the end result.
Maybe so. Actually, I hadn't even considered the shot in the right side thing. That just never occurred to me. That's a really, really clever. Just a really clever thing. That's kind of blown my mind a little bit. Sean, any favourite William Birkin mutations? What comes to mind when you think of, the G?
I think for me, speaking about it, not just from a lore point of view, but from a gameplay point of view, the this is going back to the OG, is the both train platform fights.
Yeah.
So I'm always enamoured with, particularly the G3 mutation. Mm-hmm. Because the for a start, like, the transition itself is just amazing between, both phases. I think, as I've talked about on a technical level, I also want to do a shout out to the music in that section as well, because the Birkin theme is still one of the strongest themes in the entire series, the boss fights. And I think, as in terms of like an entire production, the theatre of it, if you will, is just breathtakingly good even now, and far better, I must say, than how the remakes do it. These feel far more like they're a lot more basic in terms of what they present as a boss fight, but in terms of like an epic set piece, I think they actually do still stand out more than the remakes. So it's certainly that central piece of G2, G3 fights, and the mutations and whatnot that lead to those moments. That is how I see that's if you ask me what my core memory is of like G Birkins, it's absolutely that.
Yeah, I'll always be a little bit bitter that the G2 fight in the remake series, like a whatever that is, quick time event adjacent boss fight, where it's not really a boss fight, is it? You just kind of have to stun him and hit him with a bit of scenery. It's definitely one of the lowest points of that game when you're doing like a repeat playthrough speedrun thing, where it's not even really a real boss fight, but.
What is this, Zelda? A puzzle boss in my Resident Evil game?
It's really
Which is ironic, because it's got a big eye. You meant to shoot in the big eye. That's Zelda, right?
It's a great question, though. Because as we've just alluded to, like the main mutation on Birkin is where his wound is, and obviously that's where the eye sprouts from as well. So the question of like what would have actually happened if an entirely unhurt human had injected themselves with it, like what would happen? Would eventually the virus have overwhelmed like your immune system, and then therefore the mutation would have started? Does the devil just slow that down so your body can attune to it? Similar to what Alexia has to go through with the virus. Like, she is compatible with her own virus, but it needs the incubation process of 15 years. Maybe devil puts your immune system in that kind of state to become compatible with it faster, and that's what occurs, and that's how we get to Sherry. These are sadly questions that the series has never explored, and for the aforementioned reasons that like the G virus is created from a very specific moment in time with Lisa, and will likely never be able to be replicated ever again because of that. It may never be explored, unfortunately.
Speaking of, there's got one last point before we do move on, which is, as alluded to, there is a other G adjacent monsters in Resident Evil 2, of course, which is the failed adapters of the virus, be that Irons or Ben, and in Outbreak's case, Monica as well. Sometimes referred to as G adults more commonly these days, maybe G mutants at one point. It's your nomenclature might vary depending on your preference, but yeah, as I said before, the DNA kind of rejecting itself from a host that it doesn't find palatable and kind of persists onwards. In the original RE2, for me, it feels like, and this is again just my point of view and maybe my headcanon, the G is kind of figuring things out by infecting people. It doesn't immediately go for Sherry and maybe isn't aware that Sherry's even in the building. Or even possibly Birkin is fighting it off at this point. But yeah, G infects Irons and or Ben and or Monica. And it goes wrong and we get sort of this failed creature. And then it goes after Sherry, which is interesting. In the remake, obviously we have the idea that he's been at this for a while because we've got loads of G adults in the sewer at this point. There's a half a dozen or so. And all this sort of mass of whatever, mass of mass just in this giant nest in the sewer. As well, which is obviously a great moment and a really cool visual moment in Remake 2. Definitely, I think, largely agreed to be one area of the game. I don't want to say it improves over the original, but it's, in terms of original things that it did, the remake, that is definitely one of its strongest points where I say, oh, this is really grim. Obviously, your preference might be different on how these events play out, whether it's just a couple or we get all these over the days leading up to Resident Evil 2. But either way, it's interesting. And the creature itself, obviously, in 2, is very pathetic. I think it's meant to be, clearly, because it's established this is like a failed adapter of the G virus. They're a bit more of a threat in the remake, but how do we feel about the G mutants or the G adults? James, let's go with you.
Sorry, I'm here. Yeah, the G adults specifically, or...
Yeah. Either game, both games, however you feel about them.
Well, I mean, the only experience I have with the original game is watching Steve expertly
dispatch it in 10 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
That's usually how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, but with remake, I was the one who was ducking and diving these things. But when I first played, they were so threatening and scary. Yeah, and they also they like had dynamic health as well. I felt like, or I was just bad at aiming. It's probably that. But yeah, you like all of these failed mutations. Again, I'm going to get my file of facts out. They kind of highlight why G was both sought after and built upon. And it's incredibly complex, unpredictable. You saw that in the sewer section, just all the flesh walls, and it was just gross. Sure, the existence of them might highlight some ethical issues, but that doesn't matter for corporate, okay? We want good ideas at this table. And the G adult and the G mutants are good ideas in our minds. Because they create their own environment. You send one down, you create your own environment. Be hard to tackle with conventional weaponry because you have to go through this environment and they're surrounded by all this gooey, gross, fleshy stuff. And then they have their additional armor, like with the whatever the chrysalid over their eye is.
Yeah, that's true.
That has always interested me. That armor they have over the eyeball, that's a cool evolution of the animal. But I mean, yeah, it's as I said earlier, losing to corporate, losing one life to win a battle is incredibly inviting to corporate. And having even these failed variations would be inviting and would be something that corporate and Umbrella and friends would take in and want to take advantage of. But yeah, I'm wondering if because RE6 has the chrysalid thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering because that C virus's base is G virus, isn't it? One of its bases. Yeah, and yeah, I'm wondering if that was That was kind of a
Interesting.
callback to that
Interesting point.
with Remake 2.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess you've really hit on an important thing here because, as I said, and you've quite rightfully sort of expanded on, they definitely serve a bigger threat in Remake 2. And now, debatably, obviously from a gameplay point of view, that's a good thing. But debatably, from a lore point of view, that might not necessarily work because isn't the whole point that they're failed adapters? But I do think it's certainly interesting that maybe they're not that bad after all. Maybe they do have a use. And the fact that it does have armor over its eyes is cool, but also it's like, why doesn't the actual G creature do this? But it's an interesting thing to talk about and think about.
I think the reason why is because they are children of the G. So they would evolve past the G. So they should, in essence, be more powerful than Birkin. But they might just have it might be like getting a JPEG from 2012, and just it keeps getting compressed, as it goes and goes, which also would be again very inviting to corporate because it's like, well, eventually it's going to run out and run its course, and like electricity doesn't last forever, electronics don't last forever, neither do G mutants.
Not a comparison I was expecting, but thank you. Sean, where do you come at from the perspective on G Mutants, the originals and the remakes as well? Because they are quite different.
In the original, it basically just served to be an early boss fight, didn't it? I don't think I don't think there was much considered beyond it. It just being like a failed host, if you will.
Yeah, it obviously nicely sets up where the story is going as well, I suppose.
Yeah. The remake offers a quite a fascinating sort of thing because going back to the Alien comparison that the games do so well because they basically are chest bursters.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
They are chest bursters in the remake more than they are in the original. And I suppose what happens is in the sewers, and I would concede that it is a section that is arguably better than the original. I can say it sometimes, it does happen. What I find fascinating is the fact that they almost create like a hive, if you like. So, okay, what you have there, what's quite fascinating is for every failed host, you might not have a compatible G-human or whatever, but what you get is almost like an army of warrior drones that will populate your hive and spread this absolutely grotesque growth. I don't even really know how to describe what it is, just this fleshy, horrible growing mass. I think it's credit to the remake that they actually took these creatures and made a quite a compelling and nightmare-inducing in terms of its visual set piece. I think they're a very interesting creature.
It's a very good point. Strength in numbers. They might be pathetic one-on-one potentially, but they can change an environment according to Remake 2, certainly. Steve, where do you come down on the failed Gs?
I'm going to shout out to RE2 Classic for having some impressive animation because everyone's just thrown it straight under the bus. But seeing it evolve and transform right in front of you, even more dramatically than any of the Birkin ones, really. And you can blow its arms off and it will regrow in mid-fight. Yes, I know it's only like 10 HP, but if you leave it with that 1, you'll watch it grow back. It's pretty neat, pretty funky. Otherwise, kind of toilet. Not gonna lie. It spawns some ads, which is funky. The remake versions terrify me. I feel like if they can self-propagate and if they'd been let out, if the nuke hadn't hit, America was done. If they can make more of themselves, if you haven't got happy-go-lucky 20 and 19 somethings with rocket launchers and machine guns, have you ever died to one from its grapple attack? Because
I don't believe so.
I'm pretty sure, Leon or Claire are pregnant. Let's put it that way. It's that kind of horrifying. Yeah, don't die by the grapple attack, anybody. I love it. It's Resident Evil's equivalent to the Alien Hive, and it's much more so its own Resident Evil flavoured thing than, say, Remake 3 did the Power Station, didn't it? Where that is almost one-to-one the Alien Hive from a Alien film.
Yeah, absolutely.
I prefer this. It's distinctly more twisted and organic. If anything, more Dead Space. But I like to think, because you read in the blogs that Umbrella are disposing of G-virus experiments that have gone a bit awry, and stuff that's not cool to keep in, like William's cabinet he's got in his weird lab room, I think it's just been dumped in the sewer and been allowed to fester and grow. So I don't know how much of that is William's work and just they've let stuff fester too long and it would have got out of control if not for the fact that they already had a viral outbreak on their hands. G in and of itself horrifies me for that regard. I feel like if a nuke hadn't hit Raccoon City and stuff like that was happening underneath, like rats and all sorts of kind of beasties getting intermingled with it, we could have had a serious problem on our hands in the best possible way.
Indeed. Yes, the animation of it sort of rearing its head up and like throwing up the G Amargo, the little baby ones, is very, very gross, isn't it? So we keep mentioning Alien, but I'm also going to do a second shout out to the board game, coincidentally. Resident Evil 2, the board game, where I think G Amargo was absolutely a term. But I remember Sherwin coming to me and being like, what do we call these things? I was like, I've got you. I'm pretty sure it's this. I don't know if that's confirmed, but somebody on the internet said it once. So that's what they called in that. And also the fact that for a long time when I was playing Resident Evil 2, again, pre-internet, well, not pre-internet as it is now, because the reason behind this is the G-Adult, I had no idea what it was called, which certainly wasn't helped by the fact the walkthrough that I was following for the game called them Weevils. I was like, okay, which is I guess, yeah, it's an appropriate bug to vaguely name it after, but if you were a Resident Evil 2, the board game backer, and you remember back in the days of the community and the updates, there was definitely a Weevils reference in there because I told that story to Sherwin and he was like, okay, I'm going to make a reference to that. So I just needed to throw it in here so the Weevil story lives on. Let's
I
move
thought
on,
the Weevils were the thing in that long tunnel that can kill Sherry or Ada if you don't go fast
those are
enough.
just infected cockroaches, I think, aren't they?
They are
Infected
absolute
rodents?
speedrun killers and I hate them.
Yeah,
Sorry, not to go
they
completely
are
off topic.
awful, aren't they? Yeah. Okay, let's move on then to the other appearance of the G-Virus in the series. Touch a little bit on its reappearance in Resident Evil Degeneration, which we covered about a year ago now. It is the sole other story with a G-Virus, I wouldn't say outbreak, but an infection, a successful, quote-unquote, successful G creature in the form of Curtis Miller. How do we feel about let's talk about him we talked about the appearance of William Birkin's G. Let's start there as well. How do we feel about the look of this version of a G monster and how it compares to the 1998 Birkin version, Steve?
He's not as good, is he? But I appreciate the fact that he has been literally showered in a hail of gunfire before his transformation really kicks off. So he can kind of hand wave away just as to why he sprouts into this kind of shape. But he kind of looks gangly and like dog-like. Like literally, like I feel like his face is more dog than human. I don't like it. Is my saying. Other than we have one weird gangly eye that throttles around, it's barely matching the silhouette of G for me. There's not enough showers of gore and weird squelchy noises. I'm sorry, or a second head for that matter. You know, it's just a new head. It's not quite as cool.
No, that's fair about the second head thing. In terms of the gangliness, like I mean, if you want to call it that, as we just said though, the idea of where you get shot or whatever with Birkin, would that have changed his appearance? Yeah, you're right. Like, this is a slightly different circumstance with Curtis and his transformation. So I kind of like it in that sense. I like that it shares some similarities with the original, but it's different enough. Like, if you're going to bring it back, it shouldn't have been one-to-one, especially for a virus that is known for its kind of wild transformative periods. It's important for it to be different to me. James, how do you feel about Curtis Miller's G-Virus appearance?
Yeah, I mean, I went through it a lot with the D-Gen, but it was dealt in this movie. It was dealt with how tyrants typically are, like in the series. Same design with something a little extra, like
right, yeah.
which sucks for G because it's a virus that, like, you know, specifically isn't about following any kind of trend. Like it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. Like, yes, it's like so to see it just be this 2.0 Birkin version was disappointing. for G virus as a total, virus itself. But yeah, since then, like, its addition has been weak. Like, past RE2, whatever G virus, sole G virus stuff we've had, which actually I think is only degen. Like,
it's just
been, it's just been weak. Like, yeah, I don't want to see the same thing. I want to see what you put down in your lore about it constantly changing, constantly evolving. I don't want to see the same thing.
Interesting. Sean, how do you feel about Degen's G mutant?
You see, I've got a soft spot for degeneration, so I tend to allow it. But I hear what everyone's saying, and it is a bit lazy, and kind of it does kind of go against what we've said about the eye potentially appearing where the most trauma's been received.
Sure.
Well, Curtis just gets blowed up, and yet it's highly coincidental that the eye sprouts in the same shoulder. So it's clearly like an artistic choice. They chose to give it that kind of visual identity, so you knew exactly what they were dealing with. I kind of like the fact that it's a little bit more spindly and agile, if you will. There's something grotesque about like its elongated limbs, because I always think that's kind of creepy in things when you have overtly tall things with very long limbs. But I totally hear the argument that it's incredibly lazy, and it almost feels powered down. It's almost a bit too easy to dispatch. And Leon, obviously, with his indestructible adamantium skeleton in the CGI movies, it stood no chance to be able to defeat him, did
it? Speaking of which, then, how do we feel about the story and the choice to bring back G-Virus in this manner? Because it was a good many years without it, and obviously we've had many years since. So, yes, this is the only other G-Virus focused story in the series, which is, that can be good, that can be bad. It depends on your point of view there. Steve, how do you feel about Curtis Miller's G-Virus acquisition and mutation as it pertains to the story of the G-Virus? Is it a worthy continuation?
He might have sort of infected himself with T for what he did, really. I know that Leon says he sees you as a breeding tool, but we don't really see any of the menace of G's horrifying implications, where he doesn't really go for Angela, does he? He goes straight for, indestructible adamantium twink. So it's not quite the same.
Oh my God.
I was trying to be diplomatic, guys. But
great Twitter name, that is.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
The point is, it could have been any virus. It could have been literally any virus across the series, which is unfortunate because literally, as a man, like Curtis Miller's backstory being he lost family in Raccoon City, he has an axe to grind. He has a reason to expose this kind of stuff to the world, and it kind of falls flat. I appreciate there is a giant eye on his shoulder. That's great. Does he do anything else? Oh, he has a second form. Fantastic. He can get work at From Software.
Leon does warn Angela at one point that Curtis will be after her because she's compatible as such, and then almost immediately it feels like that's the only reason why they became siblings, is to have this very vague connection right at the end.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that the shift, I probably said this during the review of the film itself, the shift to brother and sister stuff, as gross as it is a good way to bring back G. If you're going to do it again, do a different version of that story. You need to have the family compatibility thing, as we know it's an important part of the G-Virus and what it does. So I'm glad that we do have a slight difference. But yeah, I can kind of take or leave it. I don't want loads of G-Virus stories. It's good that there's a second one, but I don't think it's as good as it could be. And I think obviously a lot of that comes from, as you guys have said, a pacing thing, potentially. The difference is with RE2, Birkin appears throughout, transforms throughout. But yes, in Degeneration, it is just a final boss fight, essentially, with two forms, one straight after the other. I
think that's potentially a problem inherent with the G-Virus itself, is that because it's kind of an end game in terms of, its mutations lead you to be a massive bulbous blob, but if it works well, you become immortal. So in terms of a storytelling device, you don't want to deploy that too much because you'll either have villains reduced to gelatinous blobs or too many, invincible protagonists running around.
Do you feel like this is a worthy story to bring back the G virus, Stars?
I think
as a soft spot that you have.
Yeah, I think the way of doing that would be exploring Sherry more, but they seem to be absolutely reluctant in wanting to do that.
I think that's it, isn't it? If they ever bring G back in any significant way, it has to be Sherry who deals with it.
Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. James, have I asked you about D-Gen yet? My brain's turned off.
Not about if being worthy.
The story. How do you feel about the story? Is it worthy? There we go.
No.
Cool.
So I can see going back, say if I was in the fandom at that point, hearing that G's coming back, I could see why folks would get very excited about it because it's very iconic, as I said earlier. It's a very iconic virus. It's been a part of the series and part of one of the best games in the franchise as well. But it didn't add any new flavor. It didn't give us anything new.
Big time. Yeah.
To the story, you look at the other viruses, C, Abyss, and T, that they all have their own personality, and some even use G in them. But yeah, as I said, I feel like this inclusion was just lazy and not worthy of the franchise, in my opinion.
Yeah, I again would talk about the pacing and runtime, budget, stuff like that, the structure of the story. There's a part of me that was like, I kind of wish we'd had a G adult in this movie just to see what it would look like. If they'd have completely structured the story differently, they could potentially do that and make it more about Curtis's slow transformation or whatever. But obviously that's not the story that they were trying to tell. But a small part of me laments it would have been cool to see what G adult would have looked like at this point. But there you go, that's neither here nor there. In that case, then, let's get on to the final topic of this podcast, which is the legacy of the G virus as it pertains to, it being used as a base for other viruses in the series, first of all. The T and the G virus, obviously the combination of them in Dead Aim, and it's a electronic field, it's electrical field, and as James has mentioned, it being used as a factor in the creation of the C virus. How do we feel about G's legacy and in terms of the world of Biotower in Resident Evil, James?
Well, the world of Biotower. It feels very natural for a virus like that is about evolving into new species, to be used in other viruses. It feels super natural. It's like I was alluding to earlier, but its compatibility makes sense with the pseudoscience we're given. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm not a scientist, but sure. The C virus, even though I don't say good things about RE6, but the C virus is a great idea. It uses the base idea of G's evolving power to catapult it to this deadlier virus worthy of Resident Evil, in my opinion. And it, as I said earlier as well, adding chrysalids, cloning, morphing. I love that because that's very G. That was very cool. But yeah, I also I both love and hate this running trend with Umbrella and friends to just throw random crap at viruses, see what would happen.
Yeah,
they keep. This must be the 50th time I've said this, but it doesn't make much sense in a narrative writer's way, but it does make for some interesting inclusions, the TG virus, which is the one from Dead Aim, right?
Yeah.
Which eventually led to its host having these bioelectric abilities, similar to an electric eel, which I really loved. There's no other virus that would really make sense to mix with this other than G, because it's so what would the word be? Adaptable, tolerable, to its evolutionary traits. And I'm a Morpheus D. Duval lover as well, so one of the only things...
yeah, shout out.
It's one of the only things I like about Dead Aim. So I think it's... Yeah, I think TG is the best use of G, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Other than Birkin. Because it's really simple, and it's really potent, and it also fits. within the world. Like, if you look at Abyss, for instance, we've already done our episode on that. If you look at Abyss, like, yeah, sure, I like the Abyss, but the teleporting is a bit much, right? But, like,
Sure.
the bioelectric, that's something we see in our everyday world, electric eels. So, like, going a bit wild with that, with the G as a base, it makes sense within the universe.
Steve, how do you feel about G's usage in other viruses?
The T and G virus one with the bioelectricity feels a bit cockamamie for me, like a bit too convenient plot device. The final form of Morpheus feels very on brand. Like that's very much late stage G mutation buggery. Okay, fine. Yeah, I can take that. I can accept that. I am a big fan of, considering we know how much he hates Alexia Ashford. Like, and I mean despises him. In an alternate timeline where somehow Birkin didn't infect himself with G and lives long enough to see the chrysalid virus, he is fuming. He is absolutely railing at the fact that he has to work with Alexia's T Veronica virus, and that makes me smile. Like, that I can see as a confluence of a lot of people's disdain for each other, creating such a horrible, horrible bioweapon that can be used in so many unique and inventively disgusting ways. Plus, it works in that, there's a mutational stage, things evolve from trauma, the Juavo regenerate or become cocooned and then become the various different evolutions they're in. It works. And the shape of the various monsters being more insectoid-like, not enough big googly eyes, maybe. Not enough of the twisted, incestuous nature of the G-Virus, for certain. But it works. That one particularly, I think, works as the fact that literally, it's probably my mind just going, it's funny that T Veronica and G are in this because they hate each other. But T and G themselves, that just felt more like a plot contrivance. Really,
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. Really, I think T and G added together. We probably said this at some point when we covered either this in Virology or Dead Aim, where it's just like, let's just put the two things that are established in the canon together and make a third thing. Like, 1 + 1 = 3 a little bit. It's a little bit hokey for me. C, I can sort of get behind. We'll probably do an episode on it one day, so I don't want to go too deeply into it. But my general standpoint is that, like I said, I don't want loads of G-Virus stories, but I'm glad that it does have a continuing importance in the evolution of viral research in the universe, because it has such clear strengths and also weaknesses. It's so interesting in that way. So for it to be kind of an ingredient in other things is cool, and I'm a fan of that. Sean, how do you feel about the G virus and its legacy being spun into other viruses?
I mean, the TG virus is very hokey and very silly, but and I love Dead Aim, so I will speak no ill against it.
That's fine.
I think the electromagnetic barrier you get given is all a bit silly, but I do like the fact that even the whole process of the T plus G virus feels very much something like a B team would do to give their title a bit of hook. Look, we can do this as well. It is canon, we promise. But that said, I do really like the fact that they adhere to some of the rules that are established. So, like, Morpheus does become a tyrant for all intents and purposes for the final fight, but then upon sustaining massive damage, the G virus seemingly overwhelms the host, and you end up having the same problem that Birkin did. You just become this large, tumorous blob that it serves no purpose for anything. And again, it's the G virus seems perfect as long as you sustain no damage whatsoever, because the moment you start, the virus starts doing its thing, where it's trying to revive you but moving you further away from humanity. Each time it does, it's like the price, isn't it? So I like the fact that it adhered to the rules, as silly as its appearance was. I do kind of like how it's weaved into the C virus creation, as convoluted and as, again, nonsensical as that is. It feels it gave an excuse for Sherry to be there, so I'll take it.
Yes, which nicely brings me, of course, to our final point of discussion, which is the other part of the legacy of the G-Virus, which is the potential long-term adaptation of Sherry Birkin, as we've seen in Resident Evil 6, and kind of throughout notes, that we've gotten since that fill in the gap between Resident Evil 2 and her eventual reappearance in 2012. of her sort of being infected by the G virus in Resident Evil 2, as we know, taking the devil vaccine, but cells still being in her body, and the government being very interested in all of that. Again, hence C virus. And a pivotal moment in her story in that she can heal from wounds and also has slowing, aged sort of properties to her. To what extent isn't entirely clear, but I guess that is also partly because we haven't seen her for an additional 12 years. Thanks very much, Capcom. So my question was going to be, what could this mean for the series? Maybe it's what could this have meant for the series? Sean, obviously, we're going to start with you. How do you feel about Sherry Birkin as the adapter of the G virus? Is this the G human, perhaps, that Birkin was looking for all along?
Well, if we crunch down the evidence, has she retained any her sense of self? Absolutely. Is she potentially immortal? She can still die, and I do like the fact that Resident Evil 6 very much makes that clear in a cutscene as well, not gameplay.
Yeah.
If Jake hadn't removed that propeller blade from her, she would have bled out and died. She makes that clear to him that she'll die if you don't help. I'll die if you don't help me. So, for all intents and purposes, she is immortal. I say in inverted commas.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we don't really know what the game. The game is very careful to not show her as being like this, like a superhuman, basically. Like she essentially, all she has from the G virus is she's retained a sense of self, and she has like superhuman, like Wolverine style healing. But she doesn't seem to have anything in the way of superhuman strength or anything like that. So I think that's a really clever way of keeping her grounded within the series, and the potential of exploring it further should they want to. And I think, unfortunately, Resident Evil 6 can be discussed till the ends of the earth as to whether it's a valid entry into the series and whatnot. But certainly one of the things that we, got through its poor reception was all the ideas and everything that the game introduced are likely never to be followed on anytime soon because of the creative reboot that happened with RE7. And that is tragic in some sense, because for all the flaws that game has, Sherry, for me, was the shining star in that game. And all the cutscenes that she has with Jake are really interesting from a character point of view. When she discusses her past, I think is some of the most compelling material in the series, not just that game itself. And to not explore her as a character, I think, has been, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest missteps, because the game really felt like they were setting up a new generation of protagonists.
Yep.
Certainly in her and Jake. There was a beautiful irony to the fact that, our potential leads going forward were going to be a Birkin and a Wesker. And to not follow that, and God, what a sobering milestone we're at 12 years later, I remember it feels like it came out yesterday, and it's already 12 years old. The fact that Sherry's remained dormant, I think, is one of the most unexplored ideas that the series could have. And I still don't think she's going to turn up anytime soon. So I love everything they did with her in that game. I think the G virus, in terms of her being a perfect G human, has been met with restraint and respect, because the last thing I would want to see is her, like Captain Marvel flying around with
big time,
superhuman strength and things like that. I wouldn't want to see Sherry like that. I thought the way they brought her back was so perfect, because she was still herself, so very happy with what they did, but massively, crushingly disappointed the fact that it seems like they're never ever going to follow it up.
Yeah, I'm going to follow that up, obviously, because, quite famously, I feel very much the same way, to the point where I did a whole video on it a few years ago about, Resident Evil and the next generation that kind of never was, which was very much felt like Sherry was not necessarily just a big part of, potentially sort of the lead character almost, but massively agree, from top to bottom. One of the things that I really liked about her was, despite having this sort of fantastical ability, if you like, it is still quite grounded, but I'll get to that. But the important thing is that she's not quite the super duper agent that some of the protagonists have gotten, or even then some. She's not the ass kicker that Leon or Jill is. She's more like a Rebecca level character for me, and the ability gives her an interesting edge and something worthy to add to the mix without her becoming, and you said it perfectly, like a superhero, like a Captain Marvel or, God forbid, Alice Abernathy.
I was actually going to say, yeah, I suppose the more adequate, comparison would have been Alice, and that would have been terrible for the games, absolutely.
But they managed to bring her back, and we'll talk about it. I'm sure I'll say this all again when we cover Resident Evil 6 at some point. They managed to bring her back and just do it wonderfully by utilizing this story and, not turning her into a superhuman. And it's just really unfortunate that because of the way that Resident Evil 6 was received, and also the way that the series has kind of had a bit of a refresh since then, with Resident Evil 7 being such a separate piece, and then I said heading into the sort of remake territory, it just feels like anything with Resident Evil 6 on it, for the most part, it has a kind of stink on it that Capcom kind of would just like to keep away from, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot in there that they, as you said, were clearly setting up to do stuff with. The only thing that kind of has come through is the overall idea that vaccines stop you from aging, which is is a thing is kind of potentially weird and kind of gross. But
that's why I take them.
It's a convenient reason why all the female characters aren't looking their age, or however you want to potentially say it.
We need to be getting Chris and Leon infected soon, because otherwise they're going to outage this series.
I know they've got that sort of salt and pepper look, but they go and get further, it's going to be troublesome.
if they get vaccinated, will they just de-age to the age of 20?
Yeah, probably. Depends on the pseudoscience behind it, but I think in a vacuum, though, Sherry having that ability, how it connects to G and G's constant mutations, trying to heal from damage, it's just like, even though it is, as I said, kind of a fantastical ability, it just connects to G in a way you're like, yeah, of course that makes sense. And also these cells have been able to grow and change in a way that others have never done before, over this long period, kind of contained and controlled. And also, from a character standpoint, just her having this biological reminder of everything that she went through, obviously, is a big part of her story in Resident Evil 6 was really, really cool. It's a shame that it probably will never come back again. But yeah, I think it's an awesome continuation of the G-Virus, potentially being used for good after all this time, after being such a volatile substance, was a really interesting route for them to go that, probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. James, how do you feel about Sherry Birkin and the G-Virus?
So before I say what I'm going to say, I want to I love Sherry, and I love I think she should come back, but I think Capcom have gone a bit too far with her, potentially. I think they flew, I think Capcom, not Sherry, I think Capcom flew too close to the sun. She's essentially the epitome of what Umbrella and Friends have been working towards. Like, she is the ultimate being, the meta-human they've been wanting to get to. Like, her blood has the ability to cure viruses.
Sure, yeah.
That's not being taken advantage of, which is wild, because we're constantly told that is a constant fight, even now. She could be used to to create even greater weapons. By other corporations as well. I'm just thinking of hooks for other games. Her blood is currently in circulation within the government. It is, they have it, and they experiment on her for years. They took her blood, her DNA, whatever the heck. They took it, and they went through all of this, and they've done nothing. They've got what you need. To bring her back, but like all the stories that have come after her, and this is, I hard put an asterisk on this is my opinion, but they've been dulled because we know, due to knowing there's someone out there who has an ability to resist all of it.
Right.
We've got this character who can resist everything, potentially, or even if she can't resist everything, make a story about that. Do something with it, because they have the capability to make something really cool, with her. And something that is, because Capcom with Resi, they like reinventing, they like kind of going, not really, well, at one point they were going a step of the head, but recently they've gone kind of parallel to their steps, which I really like. They've kind of built outwards rather than forwards.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which I like. But like, if you were to ask me, like, what would I do? And again, I am a big, RPG fan, right? So this is like one way or the other, but like, we should have a single co-op adventure, potentially with Rose or Jake, or someone else who's been underutilized, which there's an entire freaking list, even Rebecca. I mean, I'm biased, but Rebecca would be actually perfect, because those two would work together so well, I feel like. There's a fight. She has to fight with the G that's dormant within her. And it's an actual in-game mechanic, that she has to work with. And you could have these RPG elements that, you steadily unlock abilities as you play. It doesn't even need to be a tree.
Eve. Just not a complaint. Not a complaint.
It doesn't even need to be a tree. You could just add it to like items in the game that you pick up, or other viruses that she picks up, and then she just imbues herself with it. And she gains extra things depending on your choices. You get Renegade, Paragon, etc. Depending on what happens.
What?
You keep.
James is building a game out here.
I mean, this always happens during the podcast. You got to expect it.
Sorry, I got
but what I mean is, like, as you pick up these things, what I'm asking is, please, Capcom, give us choice back, like, to video games, because, like, I feel like we haven't had it enough, like, in Resi, and we used to have it so much, and this could give us that. Like, you could give us these items that you could pick up, like, and depending on your choices, depends, like, on where you go, You laugh, but it's like I might have thought about this a little bit.
Does
too
she
much.
get like 3 umbilical cords and then fights the moon presence at the end, James, or is that?
This is Capcom, Steve. They can't write stories to save their life. Okay,
just checking.
But with the narrative and the characterization, the quality that we've had, like over the recent years, they could do something like this. They don't, no need to add the RPG element.
It's
right, but like I don't want sci-fi. I don't want fantasy. I want it to be kept to a level that is within Resi. Keep it tied to the world of it. Edge of sanity stuff that we've been getting recently. Because she's this like looming shadow, like for Capcom. She's so is Jake as well. He's less powerful, but still pretty up there.
Yeah, I feel like she's a perfect example to sort of lead on from what you were saying there. Is like, as a protagonist, there's so much that you could do with that. Like, there's a wide range. She's one of the perfect characters to. A lot of people say, "Hey, let's make a lower budget game, but a less badass hero like Chris and Leon, someone like a Rebecca or a Sherry, and make a small, scary game again, whether that's fixed camera angles or not, or however you want to go at it. Just a small, scary game, bringing back someone like Sherry. But yes, you could also go bombastic with it and really try out some new mechanics, because she's a very adaptable character, least of all because she's got this virus, which is very adaptable in her. And to a certain extent as well, I just wanted to add that, remember when the Village ending happened and we had a lot of speculation about the time jump with Rose at the gravestone, and obviously we found out that it takes place in 2030 something, but everyone speculated that Rose had super quick aging and Sherry has super slow aging. So are they going to like clash at some point? I remember that was like a headcanon-y sort of like thing that everyone wanted or whatever at some point, but there's a lot you could do with her, but
the one thing I don't want, and none of us want, Capcom, is to make her a villain. Outright, don't make her an outright villain, because over the years, like, you have these very powerful characters, typically female characters, let's be honest, and they always just go overboard and they make them a villain. Like, they always do that. She needs her flowers because she hasn't had any chance, like, to show them off yet.
That's the thing. Like, I'm getting really into the weeds now, but the thing about the whole like Sherry versus Rose thing was because obviously in that cutscene, Rose is quite aggressive to the government agent or whatever it is, and everyone's like, "Oh, is she going to be like a future villain?" Remember as well. So that was part of the conversation: is are they kind of like setting up a perfect parallel of good and evil with sort of opposite powers here? But yes, I massively agree. Steve, to round us out, how do you feel about Sherry Birkin, the G virus? and the potential therein.
Squandered potential. Excuse me, you've caught me mid-biscuit. 1 second. Squandered potential. I feel like, speaking testament to Don't Make Her a Villain, I 100% agree. Sherry's got a history of being in isolation and trauma for God knows how long, being experimented on, then finding out her blood has been utilized to make bioweapons by the end of RE6. That would be enough motivation to go and burn the whole entire system down, go full Megatron, try and destroy everything. She hasn't done that. I feel like if they ever find a reason or excuse to bring the G virus back, the one person they have to bring side along with it would be Sherry, as she's definitely got to have closure on that. If any character has trauma or relation to it, it is her. She's the most person who's been revolved around. And yes, she very much seems to have gone the same route as Aya Brea, as she's been shelved by a parent company, has infinite youth, and been neglected a bit. No pyrokinesis, though, yet. If I were in control of Capcom, pie in the sky, she is definitely up there as a Revelations protagonist. Like, I could see Sherry being a perfect foil against Alex Wesker, for example. Literally, it's a Birkin versus a Wesker as opposed to being buddy-buddy. The concept of her being a G-Adapt who's perfect, I feel like everyone's a bit quick to jump the gun. We haven't actually seen what happens if Sherry bites the dust. We don't know if she just has to be shot in a particular arm or a particular thing and sprout an eye and go a bit wild. No, I don't want that to happen. I love Sherry. I want her to be in the series. I feel like as a not heavy military combatant, but someone who could be useful in, say, a rescuer role, she fits it. She's got a lot of empathy and a lot of humanity that a lot of the other protagonists don't really have, especially these days. And more Sherry Birkin, yes, please. She's got enough of a narrative hook and thread, especially what happened to her, to pull on. And if the G virus comes back, she should be attached to it. That's my general thoughts on it, anyway. I calling her a perfect G adapter feels like a happenstance thing. This is too much like an engineer gets infected by the black goo, and then this thing that happened in this, and then Prometheus is convoluted, all right. A little bit too, not unironically, like the way the G virus was formed, I guess. A happenstance of circumstances create this, which I suppose bookends it in a weird way. No, Sherry's cool, all right? Sherry's cool. Everyone else had all the good talking points, God damn it. I'm going to just turn around and say...
You almost so perfectly, as you say, bookended it with alien references. Well done. I appreciate that.
Post-clarity biscuits.
Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our patrons, and our listeners. Join the First Aid Spray Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and more. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merch at patreon.com/faspraypod for as little as $1 a month. We kicked off this season in Kajuju, and as we prepare to wind it down, in our next episode we appropriately return to Resident Evil 5 to retrospectively talk about the game's extra modes and DLC. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of us individually. I'm at Cyniac_123, Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken, James is at Moist Owlet OFF, and Sean is at STARS_Tyrant. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week.
I still think we're trying to think of it grounded, and then we realise this is a franchise that comes up with a new orbital laser cannon every other entry. Dead Aim's got one, Revelations has got one, RE5's got one.
Sticker on a ship should be fine.
No, because there was a laser in Revelations, James. It was a microwave
One of these
beam.
days, those giant space lasers are going to bump into each other, and something terrible is going to happen. Like Resident Evil 9.
With the power of her mind, she can control the internet space lasers.
God, yeah, there's a horror.
No.
The horror of her being realised like an Alice character and turning up with telekinesis in the next title.
Oh, God. Yeah,
and Wesker's come back. Hooray.
I mean,
Yeah,
the Anderson movies are a perfect study into just like how not to do it.
yeah, definitely.
I don't know if we've ever talked about this too much, but I vividly remember my reaction to Resident Evil Apocalypse right at the end, where she wakes up with her powers and she stares down a CCTV and some guy's brain melts. I was like, what the hell am I watching? You know, what happened? It was weird, hokey, dumb B-movie Resident Evil nonsense that I was actually kind of enjoying for what it's worth up to that point. And then in the final scenes of Apocalypse is where that really just sets the track down for the rest of that franchise, doesn't it? At that point, we're just going to go completely off in our own direction now. Get next up, Mad Max. All right, okay.
Do you think you watched Scanners the night before, or
Yeah, I guess so.